It was 8:30 a.m. on April 18, 1943. The tension inside the intelligence hut on Guadalcanal was a physical weight, heavier than the humid, stagnant air. Ensign George Harris, the young cryptographer, held the decoded slip of paper. But he also held the terrifying burden of a choice. The message Magic 31 confirmed the exact itinerary for Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's flight. This was an unprecedented opportunity, a shot to decapitate the Imperial Navy, but exploiting it carried a monumental risk. If the Japanese suspected their code was cracked, the entire Allied intelligence network, Operation Magic, would be instantly destroyed. The risk was nothing less than the cost of continuing the war. Outside the quiet hut, the Pacific was roaring, consuming ships and men daily. Inside, Admiral Nimitz stared at the slip, knowing that authorizing the ambush was a classified decision of unparalleled stakes. It wasn't just Yamamoto's life at stake. It was the life of every Allied soldier, a gamble that could accelerate victory or guarantee failure. The ultimate question was not if they could kill him, but could they survive the devastating strategic price of having used the code. The setting for this pivotal high-stakes moment was the vast, shifting expanse of the South Pacific in the spring of 1943. Though the Allies had secured a crucial foothold at Guadalcanal, the Japanese Imperial Navy remained an opponent of terrifying capability, constantly seeking to regain the strategic offensive. At the very apex of this command structure stood Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He was not simply a figurehead. He was the primary genius, the single irreplaceable mind who had conceived and executed the audacious attack on Pearl Harbor. His strategic foresight was viewed by Allied leaders as the chief obstacle to victory. For the Americans, removing Yamamoto was not merely a military goal, but a strategic necessity aimed at eliminating the architect of Japanese long-term planning. The silent battlefield, therefore, was the airwaves, where the fate of thousands rested on the success of Operation Magic in cracking the Japanese naval codes. The forces involved in the planned intercept were minimal. A squadron of P-38 Lightning fighters against 2 G-4M Betty bombers and their escort. Yet the true opposing forces were intelligence networks and the moral weight of their respective high commands. The stakes were cataclysmic. If the Japanese even remotely suspected that their codes were compromised by this operation, the resulting change in Japanese communication security would silence the Allied intelligence advantage gained over 2 years, potentially extending the Pacific War indefinitely and costing untold lives. The decision to proceed was a terrifying gamble, driven by the belief that Yamamoto's continued existence posed a greater, more certain threat than the potential collapse of the intelligence war. The success of the operation was entirely dependent on the vulnerability of the Japanese naval code, JN-25. The Japanese leadership, particularly Yamamoto, displayed a fatal arrogance, believing their complex codebook ciphers were unbreakable. They adhered to rigid communication protocols, failing to implement the continuous dynamic code changes necessary to maintain security, thereby providing the dedicated American cryptographers the steady stream of data they needed. This technological weakness created an agonizing internal dilemma for the U.S. High Command. The intelligence derived from Operation Magic was so valuable, a true lost file providing insight into every major Japanese movement, that the decision to use it for a high-profile assassination was met with fierce, classified debate. The classified decision went all the way to President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. Admiral Nimitz and his chief intelligence officers understood that the mission, designated Operation Vengeance, was the ultimate ghost operation. It had to appear entirely random. The counter-strategy was meticulous. The longest-range P-38 Lightnings were selected, not only for their speed, but because their twin-engine profile was less common over the target area than single-engine fighters, adding an element of plausible deniability. The flight plan was a logistical masterpiece, pushing the P-38s to their absolute fuel limit to ensure the intercept occurred at the precise minute dictated by the Magic 31 code. Every step of the mission was focused on minimizing the strategic risk, yet the agonizing fear remained. The one man who had translated the code, Ensign Harris, knew that the success of the mission would inherently contain the potential seed of their greatest strategic failure, a consequence that could lead to the Codebreakers' doom, the crushing burden of responsibility if the secret was lost. The success of the assassination hinged on the psychological and moral fortitude of those in the shadows, particularly the cryptographers. The most harrowing perspective belonged to Ensign Harris, the young analyst who first handled the Magic 31 intercept. Working in the relentless, oppressive heat of the intelligence hut, Harris represented the ultimate price of the intelligence war. He was a soldier whose weapon was abstract data. His burden was immense, defined by the constant, chilling fear that the act of saving millions of lives could inadvertently expose their secret and lead to a far greater strategic disaster. This paralyzing tension, the fear of causing the Codebreakers' doom, was so acute that it reportedly drove him to request a transfer, seeking the perceived simplicity of frontline combat over the existential terror of the code room. A secondary, yet equally critical perspective was that of the operational commander, Major John Mitchell. His dilemma was one of absolute trust in an abstract lost file, a piece of paper. Mitchell had to stake the lives of his 16 pilots and the extremely limited resources of the P-38 Lightnings on coordinates and a timing window dictated by a code he had never personally seen or verified. His mission was a logistical nightmare, a 1,000-mile round trip, pushing the aircraft to the absolute limits of their fuel capacity, all based on a decrypted message. The execution of the flight itself was a meticulous ghost operation, flown low over the water to avoid radar detection, ensuring that the entire encounter, if successful, would look like a random act of fate rather than a surgical strike guided by intercepted intelligence. The technological confrontation was not between the P-38 and the Zero, but between the American decryption methods and the Japanese adherence to their codebook ciphers. The Japanese JN-25 was a system reliant on massive, complex codebooks. The Japanese leadership's belief that the codebooks were too large and intricate to be broken was their fatal strategic miscalculation, providing the Allies with continuous exploitable intelligence. The Magic effort exploited this flaw using exhaustive human effort and early computational techniques to build a vast index of probable meanings. Yamamoto's specific itinerary, sent in the highest level cipher, became the clearest possible confirmation of the code's vulnerability, providing the Americans the perfect, lethal opportunity. The ethical and political tension reached the highest echelons, involving President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The authorization for the targeted assassination of a foreign military leader was unprecedented, forcing a difficult moral calculus. The argument supporting the attack, that Yamamoto's strategic genius posed an unacceptable perpetual threat that guaranteed countless future casualties, had to override all political and moral reservations regarding assassination. This highly sensitive decision was shrouded in absolute secrecy, becoming the core classified decision of the war. Orders were immediately given to destroy the initial message and all related operational papers after the mission's completion, deliberately ensuring the incident became a state-level lost file to protect the integrity of the magic operation. A final, crucial angle focused on Admiral Yamamoto's fatal confidence. He flew directly into the trap, driven by a rigid sense of duty and an unwavering belief in the security of his communications. He had dismissed warnings from his junior officers about increasing American aerial patrols, his confidence in his code's integrity creating a devastating blind spot. This cultural and technological arrogance ensured his vulnerability. The perspective of the Japanese command at Rabaul, anticipating a triumphant arrival, highlighted the tragic irony. They were awaiting their supreme commander only to lose contact and be left to explain the inexplicable disappearance of the flight. They correctly attributed the loss to hostile action, but their inability to pinpoint the source led them to conclude it was merely a random patrol, the necessary deception that safeguarded the secret of the single code that had, in fact, dictated the outcome. The definitive turning point of the entire classified operation arrived at 9:34 a.m., high above the dense, feverish jungle canopy of Bougainville Island. This was the precise moment the single fateful code, Magic 31, transitioned from an abstract set of numbers into a violent, lethal reality. Major John Mitchell and his flight of 16 P-38 Lightnings, 2 having aborted due to fuel issues, arrived at the predicted intercept point with frightening surgical accuracy. The statistical odds of hitting such a fleeting window of opportunity, provided entirely by a decrypted message over 1,000 miles from base, were negligible. Yet as their fuel gauges dipped dangerously low, the unmistakable sight of 2 G-4M Betty bombers, escorted by 6 Zero fighters, appeared exactly where the intelligence predicted. This was the terrifying moment of reckoning for the Ghost operation. Was the code accurate enough to justify the immense strategic risk? Mitchell, driven by the knowledge of the classified decision made at the highest level, committed instantly. The P-38s dropped their auxiliary fuel tanks and executed a swift, diving attack. The American strategy, informed by the perfect timing provided by the lost file intelligence, was ruthlessly simple. Focus all initial fire on the 2 bombers to ensure the assassination of Yamamoto. The ensuing engagement was brief, brutal, and utterly decisive. The escorting Zeros, taken completely by surprise by the perfectly timed ambush, were instantly scattered. The American pilots, keenly aware of the non-negotiable nature of their mission, attacked the lead bomber with concentrated intensity. One of Yamamoto's G-4M Bettys was almost immediately ripped apart by the concentrated fire of 2 Lightnings, the fuselage trailing heavy black smoke and plunging rapidly into the unforgiving jungle below. The second bomber, carrying Yamamoto's chief of staff, attempted a desperate, evasive descent toward the coast. However, its luck ran out as another Lightning, piloted by Captain Thomas Lanfear, pursued it relentlessly, forcing it to crash land violently in the thick jungle mangroves. Within minutes of the first sighting, the entire Japanese command flight was neutralized. The mission was a complete success, but the cost, the strategic doom that the cryptographers feared, was still unknown. The American pilots immediately turned back, flying the final agonizing leg of their journey on fumes, successfully leaving behind an aerial encounter that, to the Japanese, had to appear as a random, tragic stroke of bad luck. The vital camouflage needed to protect the magic secret. The large twist that followed was the agonizing period of uncertainty that descended upon the American High Command. Upon landing, Mitchell's team could only confirm the downing of 2 bombers and several escorts. The identity of the target remained a chilling, unconfirmed mystery, a question that hung heavy over Nimitz's command. The immediate, total lack of official Japanese confirmation for days created immense pressure, leading intelligence officers to fear that the entire mission had been for naught, or worse, that the failure to confirm the kill would lead the Japanese to immediately suspect a code compromise, triggering the Codebreakers' doom. However, the final subtle confirmation came not from a subsequent decrypted high-level message, but from an intercepted Japanese field radio transmission. This transmission, heavily garbled and low priority, referred to the sudden unplanned disappearance of a senior official and contained veiled, deeply emotional references to a national tragedy. This low-level communication, often overlooked by routine intelligence, was the specific lost file that finally provided confirmation to the Americans. The mission had succeeded, and Yamamoto was dead. The impact on the Japanese side, though its true nature was completely masked, was immediate and profound. The Imperial Navy immediately launched a massive search and rescue operation, confirming the discovery of the wreckage and Yamamoto's body days later. Their official report, designed to maintain the facade of code security, blamed the incident on a random, tragic encounter with long-range American patrols. The true psychological and strategic fallout, however, was immense. Yamamoto's death was an irreparable blow to morale, shattering the Japanese belief in their strategic invincibility. It was the moment the Japanese command realized their opponent was not only powerful, but unnervingly prescient. The single Enigma intercept, the ghost operation conducted by cryptographers and pilots thousands of miles apart, had achieved what a full fleet battle could not: the elimination of the Imperial Navy's greatest strategic mind. This singular act of intelligence exploitation confirmed the decisive shift in the Pacific War, ensuring that the Japanese would never again launch an operation of Yamamoto's strategic caliber, safeguarding the secret of magic for the crucial remainder of the conflict. The elimination of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was far more than a tactical victory. It was a psychological and strategic masterstroke that fundamentally altered the course of the Pacific War. The immediate consequence was the catastrophic blow to the Imperial Navy's command structure. Yamamoto's absence left a vacuum that no subsequent Japanese admiral could fully fill, leading to less imaginative and more predictable strategic planning. His successors lacked the boldness and strategic vision required to challenge the growing American superiority, resulting in a shift toward a static, defensive posture across the vast Pacific theater. This conservative strategic turn directly benefited the Allied war effort, allowing the U.S. to dictate the time and place of subsequent engagements. However, the most critical long-term consequence was the absolute commitment to protecting the secret of Operation Magic and surviving the potential Codebreakers' doom. The American High Command fully understood that the success of the mission and the preservation of the intelligence advantage hinged entirely on the Japanese believing the ambush was a random act of fate. Therefore, every subsequent action, every intelligence operation, and every public statement was designed to reinforce the notion of chance. The true nature of the mission was classified at the highest possible level, creating a lost file that remained impenetrable for decades. Even the pilots involved were given a sanitized, generic debriefing, ensuring that the full context of the code-breaking success remained protected. The incredible self-discipline displayed by the intelligence community in restricting the use of magic information was the ultimate display of strategic maturity, ensuring that the Japanese continued to use the compromised JN-25 cipher, providing the Allies with an unparalleled advantage throughout the war. The historical lesson derived from the Enigma Intercept confirmed the decisive role of intelligence in modern warfare. This was the first time that signals intelligence, purely abstract data, had been used to execute a strategic assassination of a foreign military leader. It validated the immense resources poured into code-breaking efforts and established a new precedent for military command, proving that the silent war fought in the code rooms was often more impactful than the battles fought on the sea. The operation's success demonstrated that the single most dangerous weakness of any modern military was its reliance on communication, a vulnerability that could be exploited with precision, speed, and absolute secrecy. The story of the Ghost operation, the precise timing, the long-distance flight, and the perfect camouflage of the intelligence source remained an untold, classified legend among intelligence circles. The burden of the Codebreakers' doom, the agonizing ethical choice to risk the war for one man, paid off. But the lesson remains. The greatest intelligence coup always carries the greatest risk. It was the definitive moment when the genius of a single strategist was permanently defeated not by physical force, but by the relentless, invisible force of information. A secret that helped pave the way for the ultimate Allied victory in the Pacific.